Is Stephanie Bingham. I am from Kentucky. I have a master's degree and undergraduate degrees in history and anthropology. And I specifically studied in college paranormal topics, so voodoo and the spiritualist movement mainly.
Hi, my name is Aoife Sutton. I'm originally from Ireland. There I studied in Dublin for my undergraduate. I studied archaeology. Throughout my teen years, whilst I was studying, I worked in the oldest operational lighthouse in the world as a tour guide. So I've always been interested in history and kind of spooky buildings and that sort of thing. In 2015, I moved to York to do a master's in bioarchaeology, and York itself is quite a spooky city as well, as you can imagine. There's a lot of ghost stories associated with it. And now I'm doing my PhD in Bradford Uni in the School of Archaeological and Forensic Sciences, which is funded by the Heritage Consortium. And I'm looking at 18th to 19th century fluid preserved anatomical specimens in heritage settings and what they can tell us about death and dying. So that's me summed up.
My name is Ashley Cassidy. I am 33 years old. I live in Los Angeles, California. I'm originally from a very small town in Southern Illinois called Walnut Hill. You've never heard of it. There's only about 100 of us there. But I moved to LA about 11 years ago, and about 6 years ago, I started a podcast with my very good, also very weird friend, Lauren. It's called Keep It Weird. I'm the producer, editor, host of that show, and we cover all things paranormal, supernatural, creepy, sticky, gross, scary, but also the weird aspects of normal things. So we've had sports episodes, we've had sex episodes, human body episodes, artificial intelligence. We kind of cover at fashion. We kind of cover everything on that show. And other than that, I mostly I spend literally all of my time editing the shows that I produce. And if I'm not editing the shows that I produce, I'm watching horror movies or petting my cat or dealing with my anxiety disorder. Those are like the only things about me. It's like I have a podcast, I have a cat, I watch scary movies, and I'm on Effexor.
I got interested in the paranormal from a very, very young age when I started having experiences and encounters with ghosts. And as I got older and sort of understood what was happening, I wanted to give myself context. So I really started diving in when I got into college, and I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't the only one that had had this happen to them. And I wanted to give myself that context by looking back and finding other cultures, other women specifically, who had dealt with spirits in the past, which is how I sort of found myself in a college in Kentucky deciding to study ghosts, which was a fun trick to pull.
I mean, growing up in Ireland, we have a huge culture around death. And we are the birthplace of Halloween and of Samhain. And growing up on a peninsula with an 800-year-old lighthouse and a place called Loftus Hall, which is considered to be one of the most haunted buildings in Ireland, I obviously heard many a ghost story in my childhood. My grandmother would tell me ghost stories and stories of the dead she had seen in old convents she worked in. I've inherited my mother's crystal ball. My aunt would read the tarot and take part in seances, and my great grandmother used to read tea leaves. So you can say that the interest was really in the family. And in Ireland and in our family in general, we have a really open discussion about death. We wake our loved ones at home. Which is quite unusual in some parts of the world. So death and the superstition surrounding death and what happens after we die has always been quite prominent growing up, and has always been something I've been comfortable talking about. So I guess that's how I got into it.
Like most people who are interested, most adults who are interested in the paranormal and the supernatural, it started from a very young age. I was experiencing things that no one else was experiencing. And I obviously had questions about it. You know, it was like, okay, why am I seeing the face of my aunt who passed away 3 years ago in the back of my parents' SUV? Like, why am I hearing things upstairs very clearly when I know my entire family is on this level of the house? So it just started with things like that. Like, why do I sometimes know what's about to happen before it happens? So it just came from like personal experiences and like having these things. And luckily I had a mom who was also sensitive to things like this. And it wasn't that she was like into the paranormal or interested in it, but when I asked her about it, it wasn't like ghosts aren't real or that doesn't exist or, go to sleep, honey, like that kind of thing. It was very much so like she was open to listening to what I had to say and interested in what I had to say. And it's not that she ever had like answers for me, but we could talk about it openly and I didn't feel stifled, I guess. So that was really wonderful that I was able to like have that person that I could at least bounce ideas off of. And then of course, once I found it, she bought me a couple books on like ghosts and like ghost investigating and like it's very silly little like tips like, oh, if you think you have a ghost, like put baby powder down and like maybe there'll be and so like of course then there was like a month of our lives where baby powder was all over the house and I didn't get in trouble for it, which was like very cool mom thing to do, to not yell at me for getting baby powder all over the house trying to catch a ghost. Nothing ever happened. Baby powder was always undisturbed. But yeah, so it started from a very early age, and then of course I started consuming like every book I could find on the subject. I got very interested then in other things besides just like ghosts. I got interested in like ultra dimensional beings and things like when I discovered the Mothman and John Keel. Goodbye world, I was gone, I was in that universe now. And yeah, and just as I grew up, I was just always interested in it, and it wasn't until I never really did investigations or anything like that until I started my podcast in 2000, gosh, when was it, 2016, I guess, when I started my podcast with Lauren, Keep It Weird. We started each season. Unfortunately, COVID's kind of put a stank on this, but each season we would do a paranormal investigation. So we went to the Biltmore Hotel. We've investigated the Queen Mary, the Culver Hotel, a couple cemeteries, a couple private homes. And that was when I really got into sort of testing things and like investigating it in that way, not just reading about it, but like talking to people about it and discovering new theories and actually attempting to communicate. And I still have experiences to this day with the paranormal. So it's just always been something that like I know it exists, and it's always been a point of frustration for me that there are people who will just like look me in the eye and say that it's not real, when it's like, okay, but it is though, because I've seen it. So like I get it if you've never seen it. I don't think everyone has the ability to experience the paranormal. I don't think that everyone has. It's just like eyesight, you know what I mean? Like I have horrible eyesight. My contact subscription is like -6. It's a nightmare. I can't see anything. But like if someone was like, I can see way over there, I wouldn't be like, no, you can't. It's not possible, because I can't. I just think that some people are born with a stronger sense of seeing paranormal or experiencing paranormal things, just like some people are born with better eyes than me.
For the book, what I actually wrote was a story from my hometown, and it is a historic story about a murder and a tree that led to some very interesting conclusions years after this murder had happened. So it's this really sort of nice little ghost story with a lot of historical context. So it's a fun little piece.
As you can tell, I'm really interested in death in Ireland and superstition surrounding death. So I wrote about an entity called the Banshee. And she's a very prominent ghost story in Irish culture. We were told about the Banshee growing up, you know. Her name translates as fairy woman. And as I said, she's female. She's supposed to have this long hair that she combs. And if you hear her wailing, you're meant to either die or somebody near you is supposed to die. So it's all about her. It's about her complexity. It's about the female and her associations with death. And I hope the readers enjoy reading about her because she's fascinating to me.
First of all, I loved writing this. I'd never written anything before. I mean, I write all the time for the show, for the podcast, because, you know, we write notes and recite things that we write down. So I have written before, but I've never written anything for a publication. So I wasn't sure how my voice would translate. But I've heard from a lot of people. I wanted it to be very easy to read, as if I was like speaking to you, but also it's extremely scientific. So I understand if it's one of the articles that people are like, what is she saying? What are these words? Because I tried to keep it as scientific as possible. And essentially what I wrote was encouraging paranormal investigators and encouraging people that are interested in the paranormal and the supernatural to expand their knowledge of things like theoretical physics and just different scientific theories when you are researching or when you are investigating, because I really think that it's going to open so many doors in discovering more things about the paranormal. Because a lot of people, when they investigate, they go into an investigation and it's almost, I use the word faith-based, and a lot of investigators that I know aren't necessarily Christians or Catholics or whatever, but it is sort of a faith, a belief in the afterlife, when it may not be the afterlife. It may be just a natural part of our world. You might not be entering into a situation where you're speaking to a dead person. You might be entering into a situation where you're speaking to a person in the future. You might be the dead person. So going into these situations with more knowledge, with more ideas, with more theories, I just think is going to, that's what's going to blow the lid off of everything. Because there's so much we don't understand, and there's so much that we probably won't get answers to in our lifetime. But I do know that if we go in with all of these different ideas and theories, we are going to get more answers than going into a place and being like, is this a ghost or a demon? And it's like, there's so many other options. There's so many other things it could be. So if we go into those situations with as much knowledge in our back pocket as possible, I think that we're going to get bigger and better results every time.
Just starting out, I really suggest to dig into everything they can find. Don't be afraid to go into the library and look through those microfiche. Don't limit yourself to what you can find online. Go to the locations. If you can find where something happened or where an event's supposed to have happened, if it's open to the public, go there, see what it looks like, see what it feels like. Get that sort of in-person context for yourself, wrap your brain around it while you're there. And don't forget, you can use both that sort of analytical side of your brain, that very logical side of your brain, but don't be afraid to incorporate your feelings, your emotions, your psychical senses that you might be getting when you're at a location. Just be open to everything and just start digging, and always keep digging.
Well, I would say it's no one you've heard of. It's the women in my family. My mother, especially, being as open to this as she was and as supportive as she's been. Even, you know, I mean, as a child growing up, and she bought me my first Ouija board. Most people's mothers do not buy their children Ouija boards, but she did. She was fine. She was cool. But also, she kind of inspired most of my beliefs when it comes to the paranormal, like believing that people are either born with an ability or not born with an ability. Because when I did become an adult and I was more open about it, and her and I would experience things in our home, we would be in the same room as my father and my sister experiencing something that they did not experience. So that was so interesting to me. And if you look at this family, the four of us, my sister takes everything from my dad. I take everything from my mom. Like, I'm a carbon copy of my mother. She's a carbon copy of my father. So it's interesting that also I got the abilities that she seems to have, and my sister did not get the abilities from my dad. But also the other women in my family, I remember I dealt with a kind of icky, I call it an icky haunting, because it was very uncomfortable. I did not like what was happening. And it was interesting because it had moved, it kind of challenged my belief system because it had moved from one apartment to another with me. And that was something that before that I was like, that doesn't happen. Well, it does. And I remember being at home for Thanksgiving and sort of talking to, my mom has 4 sisters. So at least 2 of them were there, I know. So it was these 3 women and my grandmother was there. And I was sort of telling them about this. And I immediately got that feeling, when you're telling someone something paranormal and they're not like a weirdo paranormal person like you are. So you're like, oh God, I'm going to finish the sentence. And they're either going to be like, you're insane, see a doctor, or they're going to be interested. And I was just so comforted because I finished telling them what was happening in my life, thinking that I was going to be laughed at. And they all were just like, we all have experiences too. Every single one of them, every woman at that table, my mom, her 2 sisters, and my grandmother that were at that table, all experienced things. And it just was so comforting, and really sort of, this was right before I started my podcast too. So it was really sort of like solidified that, like, okay, I have a thing. It's been passed down to me from these women, and I have to use it. I have to utilize it in some way. And so I did.
As a woman in this field, it feels something that's always been very comfortable with me as a woman talking about this kind of stuff. In Ireland in particular, there's a really long heritage of women being associated with death. We had keening women, we have the Banshee, who's associated with women. Women were always involved in the handling of the body, and and I think it's taking that perspective, as particularly as an Irish woman, into studying. And I think that transcends into aspects of archaeology and aspects of my blogging, which I do, which is to bring that different type of, I suppose, perspective, but also cultural knowledge as well.
Projects that I can talk about right this second, but there's always something in the works. If anybody wants to get a hold of me for any reason, talk about any sort of weird paranormal or historical fact, best place to get a hold of me is on my Instagram, and that is at the handle Amarna Marie, AmarnaMarie. And if you want to follow along at what weird haunted place or weird thing that I'm doing that day, that's the best place to see the pictures from all of my adventures. So come check it out. I'd love to hear from anybody.
I currently work on 2 archaeology projects which talk about death and dying in the University of Bradford. So I work on a project called the Continuum Bonds Project, which uses archaeology to open up conversations about death and dying. And I also work on the Dying to Talk project, which encourages talking about death and dying amongst young people. And I run a blog called Pathological Bodies Project, which you can get the links to on my Instagram or my Twitter. My Instagram is at Pathological Bodies Project, and my Twitter is just at Path Bodies, or you can look up Aoife Sutton as well. So that's where you can find me, and that's all I have to plug at the moment.
I do that revolves around the weird can be found on our Keep It Weird socials. So Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. It's all at Keep It Weird Cast. Our website is www.keepitweirdpodcast.com. Our YouTube channel, where we post some EVPs and a couple of videos from investigations, as well as all of our weird news segments, is youtube.com/keepitweirdpodcast. And everything else you can find by following those links.